Hey everybody, it's Thursday.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Night Bite.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Emily. And I feel like it's been a super long week since we've seen you guys. So hopefully your week has been super smooth and you feel like you just saw us, right? But, the funny thing is, this is the time of the year where, the season is really feeling like it's in transition. So we've actually been in the spring season for, quite a while now, but we are just barely seeing the leaves come on the trees and all the different things like that. And I think in a lot of places, water temperatures are just kind of starting to warm up. And so it feels like spring is just getting here.
Yeah, I think it varies a lot throughout the Midwest and throughout even just water bodies being down the road from each other. There's a lot of the shallower lakes are being a little bit warmer than some of the deeper stuff. And man, I wish I could tell you more, but it's just been so rainy and so windy. Like we literally got blown off the water last weekend. So
I saw that little thumbs up pop up, like right as you said, windy. So I don't know how that timing works, but I feel like that's something that everyone can identify with right now. Is like we just as a state of Wisconsin at least have been blasted. But I think I've seen this even way farther than just the state. So if you live in places just kind of around the state, around Midwest, even farther than that, gosh, maybe the whole country's been windy lately. I guess that sounds like crazy to say, but it feels like everybody's Facebook posts have been talking about that. So, that does affect the fishing. And so it seems silly to sit and talk about the weather for so long, but that will directly impact what those fish are and are not doing. So this time of the year, number one thing that fish are looking for is warm water. So when you get into the lake and you dunk your boat in and you check the temperature, keep checking the temperature, right? Because this time of the year, there's going to be inconsistencies. And especially with that wind, that warmer water, whether it's going to be right where the sun is shining on or the side, the wind blown side, keep track of where the water is warmer and cooler because that will help you find fish.
Yep. Yeah, they are definitely relating to the warmth, especially on those flats, and anything and that. And when you say flats, it's just a monochrome like section of water that is just either like 5 feet, it could be 12 feet, but the water temperature is a big key in that. And because when the water temperature warms up, the food warms up, and then there's going to be fish there.
I'm so sorry. I was so distracted by the fact that I was just noticing that our background keeps changing. You just keep changing it each week. So I was so distracted. I wasn't even
change anything.
I was just watching.
I put this nice little TKI one up here because they talked to us last week, but that's about it. That's the only change.
But anyways, when we were back on the lake, we're talking about these fish. And so the funny thing is if you are up north and those waters are not totally warmed up yet, then you are really going to have those fish in that pre-spawn pattern. So the last time that we were out, we were still seeing fish a little bit deeper than I expected to see them. One of the lakes that we were at had some pretty deep water in it, but we found a lot of fish around 40 feet. So that's why you were mentioning these lakes that are shallower might be a better place to start if you are an angler. And so I know that we have a few other local bodies of water that maybe max depth is 15, 20 feet. That seems super shallow, and it kind of is. But those lakes are going to warm up faster, and so those fish are going to be pushing shallower sooner. Now we do always kind of talk about, maybe leave some of those spawning fish alone or kind of find them when they're done. And that is up to you. And I'm not going to tell you what to do. But the nice thing about spring is either way, anglers can start to keep track of fish and where they are. So when we're talking about pre-spawn patterns and all of that, I think a lot of people, maybe even winter, were kind of lost. And so if you don't know what that pre-spawn pattern is, that's okay, right? Because one thing is coming up here, everybody is going to be able to see with their eyeballs exactly where the fish are. And, that's kind of funny. You were mentioning, TKI, we talked to him last week. And I think I said this then, and I hate to say this, but this is almost the worst time of year to be like, if you're new to LiveScope, if you're switching out graphs, those kinds of things, it's almost the worst time of year to be doing it because these fish are all so shallow that I don't care what kind of graph you have, it is going to be hard to mark a fish that's in like an inch of water, right? And so that's again where we get to use our eyes, and it kind of puts anglers all on an even playing field. If that's a weird way, not that it's a competition amongst everybody, but I think, the spring starts to wind down into summer. And there's a group of people that just always seem to be on fish. And then there's people that really lose them. And that's okay, right? But this is that time of year where you know where they're at. And so if you can kind of watch those patterns or that warm water or the weed growth, for each lake, it's a little bit different. And I think targeting them is a little bit different, which is why I think tonight we're going to talk a little bit about jigs. Why are you shocked? We already talked about this. But it seems like such an easy topic. But I think that there's a lot to be talked about with that. So I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves. Is there anything else that we should talk about with the fishing report?
No, not unless anybody has any questions. I mean, I don't really have much for you. It's just a lot of, this is a fun time of year for me because I really like the aspect of fishing, of finding fish, and this can be one of those years that you like find all the fish or you find no fish, and it can be disappointing for a lot of people, but for me it's really fun trying to figure that out.
I thought you said this was the year where that was going to happen. And I'm like, year? That doesn't make sense. The time of the year. So that's certainly. So when we start looking at, I guess, fishing and breaking apart these different bodies of water, one of the things that becomes really important is what is on the end of your line. And so that's what kind of brings us back to the jig. And maybe this topic we're bringing up selfishly, but part of why I am thinking about this is I'm really looking at my tackle box. And okay, so we already went to the river and we did walleyes and all of that. And that tackle box happened to be ready to go. It isn't always, but this year it was mostly fine, right? But we're coming up into spring, and I know that I left last open water season with my jig box, let's just say lacking, because, we had fished, I don't know, rivers and stuff before, and I think I just needed to restock. And so that is what I am doing coming into this year. And so there's a lot that goes into jigs. So when people are out there and they are stocking up their jig boxes, let's start with some really, really, really basics. So what even the jig is made out of. So we all know that there's lead jigs. We all know that there's tungsten jigs, and we will hit on maybe all of those. Is there options beyond that?
Yeah, there's like tin bismuth alloys. That's what a lot of state agencies try and go to when, if their state decides to go lead free. I believe that's pretty popular out in Europe. Don't quote me on that, but I think the brass, you can get into the brass stuff. Yeah, I mean, you can do it out of any metal that sinks, right? You could take a bare hook and wrap it in copper wire and it could be a jig. That's it. It's just a weighted hook.
Well, and I guess that's true. I mean, I think we've also seen people do like some artsy stuff with epoxy and stuff, and I don't know maybe all the keys behind that. I just feel like, it was worth bringing up, like you said, bismuth, because that's something that, in my opinion, I feel like it hasn't really caught on. So you mentioned some places it has. So maybe I need to get over to those places, right? It has kind of that slightly slower fall rate, like lead. I know lead falls fast too, right? But in comparison to something like tungsten that is super extra heavy and falls super fast, those are kind of the options. And like you were exactly mentioning, there's a lot of initiatives for lead free. So no matter how you do and don't feel about that, I think that there's a lot of people excited and a lot of people that aren't. And that's okay, but it's something that's happening in a lot of places. So if you're also like vacationing somewhere, this is a good thing to start looking up in those regulations, right? To make sure that you're prepared. But for today, one of the things that I was doing actually is we still have a lead melting pot, and I wasn't doing that today, but at some point that's going to happen. And so we do make a lot of our own lead jigs. And I think that there's a lot that goes into that, that we've learned as jig makers that maybe people don't always think about at home. And so one of them that I'm going to bring up pretty quick here right away. And I have even just like a little unpainted. Let's see how close I can get. Woo! There you go. If it's in front of my face, you can kind of see it pretty good. And this is actually a pretty big jig. I would be using this for walleyes, and only if there's a lot of current, I'll be honest. So on your screen, it looks itty bitty, teeny tiny. But what's important is if you can kind of see in front of my forehead, this is not a perfectly round hook. You can see it's a little bit pointy, where it's rounded, it's pointed a little bit, and they call this a sickle hook. And this is something that you're really fond of. So tell us why you like a sickle hook.
It's been around for a while. It's just a design that I feel like um
Oh, that's a red.
just has a little bit better staying power when you get a fish hooked. I don't know. It might be in my head, might not be.
This will help.
But they're opposite.
Yeah, it's so hard.
But yeah, I mean, it's it's not. I don't think it's a make or break something. It's just a different style preference.
And so it's really hard for me to align this. I guess I didn't plan very well that I was going to do this today. But at the bottom here, you can see that is a rounded hook. And right above it is that sickle hook. And I don't know if they're exactly the same size, but they're like pretty darn close. And so you can see that little bit of a difference there. Oh, here. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. That's a pretty bright pink one.
And that's my favorite. There's nothing wrong with pink, Ryan.
That's kind of pink and yellow. It's swirly. But I think so often, this traditional rounded hook edge, I just think because it's tradition is sometimes why it gets used. I think so often people just resort to that's what a hook is supposed to look like. And so they don't always stop to think about those other options. Something as simple as that sickle. And so you were saying that you feel like it keeps the fish on a little bit longer and
yeah, I think it just has has a big enough gap, but the way it's designed, there's like a right angle at the bottom, and so I don't feel like they get as much leverage throughout the travel of the hook. They get pinned into the corner, and it kind of stays there as long as you keep the tension on it. I kind of got into it a little bit more on the crappie side, and then it's just transition. I've just switched all of our hooks over. Just because it's a preference, and the less things you have to buy, the better. So I just like it.
And the age-old debate, and this is actually a really funny example of it. I know it's hard. Oh, it's impossible to see at home. One of these is a red hook, and one is a black hook. Do you think there's anything to that debate?
I think so. Like every once in a while, you'll find that it makes a difference. I don't know if it's all the time. I think it's just kind of fish and fishery dependent. So I don't know. That's just something you kind of have to have a few in your box just to play with. And if if nothing's working, maybe just switch that, and that might just be the ticket. Who knows?
Well, and I think it's one of those things that comes down to maybe even confidence. Your confidence bait is, if that red hook is what is going to make you feel like
you're
that.
Invisible, Jake.
Oh, yeah, because it's green. But if that red hook is what's going to make you feel like those fish are going to bite, then it's worth using. Or maybe you're the kind of person that likes that metal look because it has a little flash, or maybe because it blends into the water. It's funny, all the different contradicting type things that people come up with in talking about this. But the funny thing is, both actually will work.
Yeah.
Some days, maybe one seems to have an edge or maybe not. But ultimately, both are really still great options. So I always love that debate, and I always kind of err to the side of a red hook. And I feel like you don't prefer a red hook.
I just don't go out of my way to use them. I think, if you catch a handful of fish on them, the red wears off of it anyways. And so I don't see you tying a new red hook on every time the paint wears off and you still catch fish. So I guess I just skip the step of having to retie or look for a red one. I will say that in the springtime, I do prefer to run a red stinger hook versus a darker or a bronze, just because I feel like if you already have, like a black nickel or something, and just adding a little bit of color to the backside of your bait, whether that's the stinger or the same reason you put a different color on, or you pick a bait with a different color on the tail that contrasts the body of the bait. Same kind of deal there. I think it just adds that little bit of a different contrast to the bait. So I'll run a red stinger hook almost exclusively.
That's really funny to hear you talk about.
This is so funny.
Because I don't know, you just like, oh, I never like red hooks. It doesn't matter except for these. I don't know. It just, but that's the thing. And that I don't know. I'm not making fun of
Just
you. I
my
just love it.
preference.
Yeah, that's exactly what we were talking about. Is, but again, if that's what gives you the confidence to go out there, then hey, I'm all about that.
She doesn't like stinger hooks. That's why she thinks.
Okay, here's the deal. I most often use stinger hooks when we're like river fishing. And here, just river fishing is snaggy to begin with. And I just feel like you're going to add 3 more hooks to the hook that's already getting stuck on things somehow. And yeah, I know. And so often the fish comes up on the stinger hook, but I just hate it, to be honest. I guess that's ridiculous. It's just true. So the other thing, I have kind of a little table of jigs sitting here in front of me. But you know, as far as making your own jigs, I guess I have to pause and stop and say, why make your own jigs in the first place?
Mark is
Team Red Hook.
Team Red Hook.
Throw your vote in the comments.
Yeah. Who else is Team Red Hook?
So why make your own jigs?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. I think if you have a spot where you can source enough lead personally, which isn't a whole lot, like 5 pounds of lead will go a long way, especially if you're doing like 3/16 ounce jigs and less. Like if you're only doing 16 ounce jigs, you'll have like a million jigs. You'll never go through that many. And if you do, then you need to work on your knot tying or feeling the bottom. But I think part of it is just having the flexibility to you can keep your tackle box slightly lighter. And that's because you don't have to open a package and put them all in your tackle box so you have them all with you. You can have like 3 of each color, or 5 of each color instead of having a bunch. And then if you run out, then you can make some when you get home or during the week. So you can keep it all stocked up but not have to have a super heavy tackle box, but still have an assortment. Along those same lines, you can also have colors that you can't find anywhere else. And so that would be not only just the standard powder colors or the Stardust colors, but you can mix those colors to make different colors. And so something as simple as like what we call window tint. That's just like a brown
you
or
can
a
imagine
black.
at home if you've ever seen a tinted window.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like.
Well, but it's a brown or a black mixed with a clear coat
and put over this.
And so that it just adds just a little bit. You could take that window tint, put it over a base like silver, flip that over, use your paintbrush and paint the belly white, or you could paint it gold. And then you have a dark translucent top that has like a flash behind it because the lead is a little bit shiny. And then you have like a silver or a gold or a white belly. So it's a little bit more of a minnow. Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of custom stuff you can do for yourself. I think one of the downsides is that even though it's a little bit of it's not a huge investment, like a lead pot's like $100 or something. Lead's like $3 a pound or whatever it is right now. You can use wheel weights. The problem with current wheel weights though are they're not clean. They're mixed with other types of metals, so that can, if you're trying to use like a Lee lead pot, like a bottom pour, you can kind of mess that up by getting crap stuck in there. So you might have to do some cleaning. But I think you get to a point where you've made all the stuff that you want and you don't go through it as fast as you think you do. And so then you get to a point where some of this stuff sits around for quite a while because you don't have to go through it. And then you're like, oh, I'll make some for friends. And then it's like, oh, well, maybe I should start selling some. And then it's like, it's a really slippery slope.
But you're getting way off topic here, which is fine. But the point of why you make your own tackle though.
Yeah.
And you were talking about the customization though. And I think like before we get too far from that, because I think to be honest, that's a huge point, right? Because people can go, you can head to the store. Sometimes you can even go to expos and you can find like clearance bins. Like if your excuse is that you're going to pour your own jigs to save money, like maybe. Maybe not, right? But I think a lot of times when people start looking at the customization process, so lead, as long as it's clean enough to pour, is generally lead is lead, right? Generally. But when you start thinking of like hooks, there's like a million different kind of hooks on the market. And I'm not going to sit here and give you a hook lesson because it's like, I'm not prepared for that, right? There's so many different options out there. But I think, as a bait maker, you do have the option to customize. Am I just going to go and buy the cheapest hooks that I can find in bulk because that's easy? Or am I really going to, look for a sturdy hook because maybe I'm doing something like bass fishing or pike or a tournament that really means a lot, right? And so those are the things that you can't customize at a store. No matter how many bins you look through, you can find all different colors, but to some extent, you can't necessarily control that hook. And so when you can do things like that at home, and then combine it with what you're talking about, the different colors, all of that, that's when that becomes really special.
Yeah, I mean, it's really nice when you have a jig profile that works in a certain situation, but maybe you want to make it into a live bait hook instead of like a plastic bait hook. So that means you would or shorten the length of the shank of hook that you put in there, not necessarily the size, just shorten the length. And they sell, the live bait versions of all the jig hooks. And you can put that in your favorite bait mold or your jig head mold and still have your awesome profile just with you'll be able to fish live bait more effectively with it. So that kind of customization is kind of nice too.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that I love to, I guess, give a shout out to is if you have people at home, or let's say that you yourself are an artsy person, or maybe your kids are, or whatever, jigs are a really great craft where you can be artsy, but it's not a huge giant project. So you can go and you can just fish a plain lead head, actually, like try it, because if you never have, that silvery color is so natural. Fish will bite that. And then you can go and you can just like make plain colors. This is really chartreusey, but in this light, it looks like white. So that's funny. But you can do all kinds of things. Here's kind of a cool blue. Oh, it's blue enough that it's blending into my black background. That's funny. Where was I going with that? Oh yeah, but then you can do artsy and craftsy stuff. So I don't know. Oh no, you can't even barely see this. Well, what you can tell based on the green screen is that it is dotty. So it's all kinds of different patterns, and it's not quite like a wonder jig. I don't know. It is all kinds of spotty. Then there's all kinds of things. Oh man, all these jigs, they're so small. That's a thing. Oh, look at you. See, that's like a little bit swirly. And so that's just fun stuff. Like, is a swirl jig going to make fish bite more than a plain jig? Like, probably not, but that's one of those fun things to do at your house with your family members to get them excited to get out into the water. And also just, fun for yourself. If you have a plain yellow jig head sitting in your box versus like a swirl yellow jig head, I know which one I'm going to reach for every time. And again, it just makes me a little bit more excited for that cast. And then the best part, we talk about this all the time, when we're in the boat and you can catch a fish on tackle that you created yourself. There's literally nothing better than that. There is nothing better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it just builds confidence in different styles. You can try out different styles. And the great part about any kind of the molding process, whether it's plastics or it's jig heads, I don't think you lose very much in the way of market value. And all of us, Emily and I included, all of the people that currently do bait projects, where everybody's like big into trading. And so not necessarily cash. And you can definitely sell stuff off for a decent amount of what you put into it if you decide not to do it. But if you just start like, what, I've used this a couple times. I'm not really huge on it. I thought I was going to be huge on it. Let's put it up on one of these bait making groups and see what people have to trade. And maybe somebody's like, hey, I've been looking for that. It's sold out by me. I can't find it anywhere, blah, blah, blah. Here's what I have. And then you're like, oh, that's a cool one. And then you just like mail each other different molds. And it's a really cool thing to be able to do that and kind of be able to switch up your tackle box a little bit in that way.
Alrighty. So then, I mean, as far as why do we make baits, I guess all of those things and more.
Hey, Eric.
It is a ton of fun. It's a way to fill those rainy days and windy days, unfortunately, when you can't actually be on the water. But it does also, I feel like it gives me some control in that fish catching, because if I have an idea of what a fish wants, sometimes you can't always just find exactly what you're looking for. When you make your own jigs, you even, well, actually, before I was going to say that, let's talk about this before we move on. I know, back and forth, because I was about to talk about how to upgrade your jigs, and you are welcome to do that, and we will get there, right? But one of the other things we've got to talk about is, I keep showing off, oh, plain lead head jig. Okay, fish with that, fine. But let's say that you don't have a fancy setup, right? What are ways that you can paint this jig?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is nail polish. So nail polish is super cheap, especially if you go to Walgreens or whatever, Walmart or whatever, and they usually have clearance ones, and you just pick out whatever colors you want because there's a million of them, and then you just get a clear coat. Usually clear coat bottles run about $6 or $7, and it'll last forever almost, it seems like. And there's a lot of uses for the hard clear coat. You can use it in tying and some other bait crafting stuff. But yeah, that's like the easiest, I think, and the cheapest way to get into coloring stuff.
And I always like to think of even spray paint. Let's say that you just bulk want to make a whole bunch of one color. You're able to just set that down on maybe cardboard or something and spray right across. And then maybe flip them over. Maybe you make one side pink, you make the other side chartreuse. I don't know, but you get to choose that when you're making your own jigs. And so that's fun. The reason it's worth talking about that is because this can be a really pretty simple craft hobby project to get into. You mentioned the Lee pot might be like $100, and I think you're probably right. But they sell even smaller lead melting, like the spoon itself heats up, and then you can pour from there. It's not quite as quick or efficient as the Lee pot, but I think you can buy one of those little spoons for like sometimes $20 even. So,
I guess I wouldn't spend my money on that. If you were just gonna melt stuff in a spoon, definitely I would not recommend getting the electric one. And I would just go to Goodwill and get a stainless steel ladle and use it until it burns up, and then do a different one. Because honestly, if you're going that route, I mean, I think it's a lot more messing around than it's worth.
I mean, you have to be, if we're advertising this as family friendly, though, you have to be careful of like what's safe and what's not. And
right.
So people can always judge that and do what works for you. But the point of all I was going to say is that this doesn't have to be expensive. You don't have to spend $100 on the lead pot, and that there are other options, and there's a lot of cool options. Just search that online, like melting lead, or I don't know, whatever, fish jigs. Get a hold of us. We'll talk to you more about it. All that. Absolutely. Once you have your jigs poured, because the pieces are not super expensive. Sometimes buying the hooks in bulk, sometimes that can get a little bit pricey. But as long as you can find your lead, that's pretty easy. Like we were saying, the painting doesn't have to be expensive. But let's say that you do want to buy a lead lead pot and you do want to like paint the official way. So what does official lead jig paint look like?
Normally it's a powder. So there's two different kinds. One I'm familiar with, one I'm extremely not familiar with. I have never used it. But one is, I think it's CS Coatings is probably the most popular powder paint for jigs. You can just find it at Fleet Farm or Cabela's, or, if you type in jig powder paint into Google, that's probably what's going to pop up. They have like 300 different colors. They come out with a bunch of different color mixes. And so that's probably what you run into. There's another one called Stardust that has a little bit different way of using it. So like with the powder coat, you heat it up with a heat source. You heat the lead up with a heat source. You dunk it in the paint, and then you can hit it with the heat source a little bit more to, flatten it all out, and then you bake it. Stardust is different. It's still a powder. You cure it in water. I don't know. I don't know how that all works, but I've heard that it's fairly durable. Relapse Tackle on YouTube, he does Stardust, so you can go check him out. But yeah.
Well, and we always talk about powder paint like it's the only option because it feels like it, because that's what's durable. And like what we're saying, when you are casting your jig and bouncing it off of rocks or, I don't know, brush or whatever, you're looking for something to be really durable, right? And so the other option that you can do is just airbrush. So I don't expect everybody at home to have an airbrush either, but that is an option. And I think a lot of times people that are painting in bulk will use an airbrush. And so the important thing there is the preparation. So as long as you're using really clean jigs, so if you just poured all of that lead, that should be pretty clean. Or like, let's say it was sitting around your garage after you did an oil change, you're going to want to really make sure that those are cleaned off. So I would probably just even use some Dawn blue dish soap if you can clean that off. Otherwise, some alcohol. But really clean those, because the more that you can prepare a clean lead finish or base, is the better that paint is going to stick. And then again, after that spray painting, then you're going to want to do a clear coat on it to protect it. It looks like Josh is pulling some things up on the side, so we'll see what that is. But overall, how you choose to do your jigs is kind of up to you, and that's kind of a really fun thing. Are you getting to this now, or is that for later?
Whatever.
Josh is pulling up things on our other monitors, so it's hard for me to not look over there. In the comments, Bo is mentioning glow paint jigs for night in the summer. And that's actually a really great thing to comment, because if you even just have a whole box of jigs right now and you're like, I don't need more jigs at all, I have too many, I don't know what to do with them all. Or let's say that one time your favorite lake was like, all they bid on was pink. And so every jig that you have is pink, and now you're at a lake and they don't bite pink. And you're like, what do I do with this? These are also situations where you can kind of upgrade these jigs. You can repaint those jigs that you're not using. If you have too many of one color, that's okay. It doesn't have to be that color anymore. And again, this is where Bo was making that great point. Let's say that you have a whole bunch of jigs and you wished that they were glow and they're not. You can buy glow spray paint and you can change all of your jigs to glow. And that's just the kind of fun thing that you get to decide to do. Look at your face. You're like, I wouldn't do that.
The one caveat with all the spray painting that you're doing is that it needs to be clear coated in some way, because that'll chip off if you blow on it. not literally, but it's not very durable as this kind, because the lead is soft and so it moves, and that's why the powder coatings are really the best way, because they are semi-flexible. They do chip at some point, but they kind of bend if you're hitting rocks and stuff a little bit. So that's the only caveat, is like, if you're spray painting stuff, make sure you clear coat it with something, 2-part epoxy is good. UV epoxy is decent. Even, the fingernail clear, like the Sally's hard nail polish clear is good. So
that is absolutely true. I don't know what part of what you said made me think about this, but as far as customizing your jigs, it would be really you could just take even a permanent marker. And like Josh was saying, if you don't seal that on there, it will wear off, right? But if you are in the boat and like you have a kid with you and you like want all of a sudden this yellow jig to be more fire tiger and like you want black stripes on it or something, like you can draw that. And that's kind of like a funny thing. And I think people sometimes just underestimate the fact that you can just do whatever the fact that you want. You don't just have to accept like a store-bought product to remain as it always was. So do what you want with it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I was going somewhere. Oh yeah. We're working our way through building jigs and stuff. So we've done some easy stuff and then you can graduate to harder stuff. But I think ultimately the finishing of that jig can be really fun, because again, you can just leave it as plain lead head. You can leave it as just painted. But there's some other examples. So we can bring this one back up. This is a pink head and it has a little spot. It's like a minnow head. So it has a spot for these eyeballs to be putting on or to be put on. Like we didn't just glue them on randomly, which is something that you totally could do, right? But some of these jigs you really can upgrade. Oh, here's a perfect example. Josh is showing me the one I've been holding all night. Look at that. This is the same jig. And so you can see there is that little eye socket in there. And so you can get like eye decals, stickers, whatever, get it on there, glue it on. But you can even do like funny and ridiculous things. So we were at a hobby craft store one day and we found, oh man, these do not look that glittery on this screen, but in person, these gems are like super glittery and shiny. They happen to be the same diameter about as the eyeballs. And so on this orange jig, I was able to put this white crystal eyeball, and it's kind of rainbow even. But in person, this is really cool. Is this going to upgrade the jig to make it bite, make the fish bite? I don't know. But does it give me, I don't know, a little bit of confidence to try it? Maybe. So again, those are just all kinds of fun choices that you can make. Some people choose to do a lot crazier upgrades, and I think that you made this one, right?
Mm-hmm. She doesn't even know if I bought it or made it.
Well,
That's
because
awesome.
because it's kind of cool. And so this is a way smaller jig than what we've been using for the rest of the evening, but that's okay because these can be all panfish jigs, these can be walleye jigs, these can be whatever you want. But you can even transform these into other things. You can tie them.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, that's a whole nother ball wax, I guess. You're talking about jigs, and that's more into the tying realm, and that has a bunch of other components that go along with it, like thread and different tying materials, and a lot of it you can get at Hobby Lobby or
But look at Josh, he's shutting it down. He's like, we're not talking about this. This is too much of a big topic. But I think for so many people, this is that logical next step. I'm not making fun of you, but I'm just saying.
Well, I'm just saying before I was trying to tell people to like go to and save some money and go get a lead spoon over at Goodwill. And now you're telling me to go tell them to spend another $100 on fly tying material.
Choose what you want, and you don't have to, right? And so I'm not expecting anybody to go and spend $1 bajillion on fly tying material, right? But I'm just saying, like, if you're that kind of person and you have a whole box of jigs and you want to transform them, that's an option that you have because, like you're saying, it could be just simple thread. It could be, did you not tie a jig from dog hair?
Yeah. And I use milkweed seeds.
Yeah, milkweed seeds. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like all kinds of crazy stuff. And what one person might not ever think of, somebody should try, right? But I think that's the nice thing about tying up a jig is that you can go and you can be really intricate. This has like an orange belly on it, right? Tied in. This will not be the first jig that you make, right? But something like if you like using bucktails, if you like using marabous, marabou is literally just a feather. It's like a tip, the fuzziest part of a feather, right? And so what you can do is you can just, if you even have, don't tell your wife I said this, if she has a feather boa, if you cut out one feather, she will not notice. And if you use some like sewing thread, I mean, I'm saying you look up a YouTube video for how to tie this and attach it all together, right? But it is really as simple as a feather and
some dental floss.
Dental floss. Yeah, great example. And so again, that's something that you can really use just to customize for fun at home.
Yeah. Yeah, great little learning projects, and there's really no wrong way to do it. I mean, even some of the stuff, like especially the new things that I try, it never turns out good the first time, and you have to make a handful of them, or just strip off the bad one that you just did on the jig and redo it on the same jig over and over until you get a version that you like. And it's more of a process. You're looking for to hone a process and not so much the outcome. The outcome will come. Like it'll look good eventually. It's just paying attention, learning the process, and then you'll have quality product after that because you'll know what works and what doesn't after a few times. Anyway, so Emily got into This is one thing that Emily does to me. So I go off on this huge tangent. So we've covered like painting jigs, and we've covered like the types of hooks, and we've covered like eyeballs, and now we're talking about fly tying. How do you get a jig from a bare hook to being a jig? And Emily just glossed over the fact that you have to spend $60 on a mold. Well, 35 to $60, depending on what kind of mold that you get. Or if you're a little bit handy and you have some Legos, or a couple of 2x4s or something nearby, you can make molds fairly inexpensively. Now,
Yeah, this is way hard.
It's not hard. It's not hard, especially if you're just trying to do it just to like, if you're trying to do it just to play around with it, not have a lot of overhead in it. This 1 pound can make like a 2x2 mold. So that would be a single jig head. And this one can, you could make probably 100 jig molds that are 2x2x1. And so basically all you do is you would take one of your jigs that you bought at the store, and you make a form just like you would for concrete or whatever. You can look up how to make mold forms on YouTube. But basically it just needs 4 sides, and you need to use, usually the easiest is hot glue underneath whatever you're using to make the well. And that makes it waterproof. You mix some of this up to peanut butter consistency, and you put it in there, and you get it to be smooth. And then I like to let mine, this hardens up fairly quickly too, but I like to let mine harden up just enough so then I can press my jig into it, and you press it halfway. And then you let it set like that. And then once it's set and it's hard, you can take the mold apart. You can let it completely dry out, put a little bit of Vaseline over the top of the whole thing, jig still in there. And then you put another form on top with the hot glue. You fill it up with more putty. And then when that's hard, like give it 24 hours, you pull it apart, and you'll have your jig mold on the inside. And then you can ream out a hole to pour the lead in. You need to have like a clamp to hold it together. But this is stuff that you can pull up on YouTube, and it's not very complicated. It's hard to
You like
put it in
refused to
words.
cover tying because it was like too hard, and then you're like,
No, I never said. I said expensive. You were telling me that it was we were getting too expensive before, and then I'm just saying this is a fun way to like be able to make a mold at home of a jig that you get from a store or that you already have on hand. So you spend $4 on this. You have an old jig in your tackle box. You have a couple of scrap pieces of wood and a hot glue gun, and you can make a mold for the jigs. And then all you need is the ladle from the store. You could buy the ladle you were talking about because you saved all that money on a mold.
No, at that point is when you're buying your metal spoon and hoping it doesn't melt.
It won't melt. It's stainless steel. You use it for cooking.
But I think that's why we talk about this, because honestly, we're each other's opposite in the way that we make this kind of stuff. But that's okay, because you get to choose where at in this craft you want to be at. What applies to you? What doesn't? What is realistic? What is not? And so maybe somebody out there is a CNC machinist, and they can cut their own mold, right? You never know. That would be super cool. Let us know, because that would be right. But I mean, you never know what kind of skills people have or how much they do or don't want to get into it. And so there's any end of the spectrum that you're able to jump into. And so I think that's just really fun.
I guess my point here is if there's any young people listening, like, don't think that you need to go out and buy all the stuff, or you need to wait for birthdays and Christmases. Like, get creative. There's a lot of stuff out there. Ask some of us that have been doing it for a while. Go on the
forums and just buy the secondhand equipment, because it's always those molds stand up. They
I'm going to have to disagree with you. I think you learn more by trying to develop, and this way you get a sense of how you can set up a jig mold with a predetermined shape, and learn your techniques of making a mold. And then from there, you might be a good sculptor. You might be good at something at art class. You can make a clay version, or you could carve something and make a whole different shape that's not available on the market and have your own custom jig that you made the mold for. And I think you learn and you have so much more appreciation for stuff like that, in my opinion. When you learn those skills, you take those skills through your whole life. But go out and buy a mold. If that's what you're comfortable with, like Emily said, there's plenty of places to get secondhand stuff. I just think, don't let the money part of it scare you away. If you are interested in it, just reach out to people that have done it. And everybody's like so willing to talk about it because it's a super fun hobby. Look at you.
It can be a super fun hobby. I thought you were going somewhere.
No,
that.
that's
I was
it.
just waiting for the rest of your thought. But I mean, as far as jigs go, I mean, honestly, that was a lot of it. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome, right?
I think another day we'll talk a little bit more about plastics. I think we've done a little bit with plastics on an episode, and people seem to like that, so that was fun. To be honest, I thought that tonight we were going to be pouring jigs for you guys. So next time, hopefully, we'll set up and we'll do things like that. We'll show you some of how we are making jigs and stuff. And I think that's going to be a really fun thing for people. So more on that in the future. But otherwise, go out there, have some fun, try some new colors that you maybe haven't tried, or buy a new color that you haven't tried before, because you never know. Or even just find a local bait shop. Maybe they're making their own baits and you never know the kind of cool jigs and stuff that you're going to find there. So,
yeah.
With that, I don't know. I think I'm kind of at the end of jigs, unless we want to sit here for a full another hour, but I don't know if I'm prepared for that. So, I know that we'll be back talking about this. If you have more questions or thoughts or things about jigs or fishing or whatever, we would love to talk about that as well. So drop that in the comments. And even if we are not doing this live, we will still get back to you either on Facebook or YouTube or wherever that is. If you are listening to this as a podcast, make sure to come and look us up on those other places. I'm going to interact with us live so we can answer your questions in real time. Otherwise, drop us a comment and we'll get back to that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if anybody has any questions in particular about any tackle craft, rod building, any of that kind of stuff, just feel free to reach out to us, because both Emily and I, we both respond on the messenger, and we'd love to help people out with that, because it's super fun. Like Emily said at the beginning of the episode, like when you catch something on something that you've built, it's like so much more rewarding.
And with that, if we don't see you on next week's edition of the Night Bite, then hopefully we see you out on the water.
Night, everybody.